This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on relations between UAE and Israel. The participants are KP Fabian, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the historic agreement which has been reached between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, and it goes to normalize relation between the two nations, and it is being hailed around the world as a milestone in the West Asia peace process. Ambassador Fabian, how do you look at this deal which has been hailed as historic? But at the same time, we have also heard criticism from the Palestinian corners about the deal.
Let me put it this way. It is historic in the sense that it is good when countries recognize ground realities and establish diplomatic relations between them. At the same time, what we have to understand is that this agreement, which was announced by President Trump, not by UAE or Israel, it was President Trump who announced it the first time, and then others followed. It's certainly good for Israel, but it's also good for UAE in the sense that Israel and UAE can work together on matters of common interest, such as science and technology. But I do not think that it is a peace agreement for the good reason that the two countries were not at war. UAE was established in 1971. It was nowhere there when Israel was established. So UAE was never at war with Israel. Only thing is that as part of the Arab League, UAE, following the 2002 King Abdullah plan, that is, Arabs will recognize and be at peace with Israel if and when Israel withdraws from occupied territories occupied in 1967. That has not happened. Therefore, the feelings of the Palestinians, they are absolutely justified.
Ambassador Fabian, when we say that this is a kind of a peace agreement, I think what people and a lot of writers are trying to say is that maybe this will give the Middle East, which has always been a hotbed of clashes and conflict, a chance for a greater peace in the region. We also see that this is the third Arab country which has normalized relations with Israel following Egypt and then Jordan. And there are suggestions that we might see a few other Arab nations also normalize relations with Israel in the coming few months this year. Do you feel that as more Arab countries normalize their ties with Israel, it also in a way makes the region overall more peaceful?
Let me give the answer in 2 or 3 parts. One is that this is not the third Arab country to normalize relations with Israel. First it was Egypt, then it was Jordan, then it was Mauritania in 1999. But Mauritania walked out of that agreement in 2009 when Israel attacked Gaza. So this is the fourth Arab country. And I expect other Arab countries to follow, especially Bahrain, Oman. We do not know whether Saudi Arabia will follow immediately because Saudi Arabia finds itself on the horns of a dilemma. When the Trump plan, was announced in January this year, MBS, that is the Crown Prince, wanted to support it, but then King Salman stepped in and Saudi Arabia did not support it. As custodian of the Holy Mosque and as the leader of the Arab world, Saudi Arabia will find it difficult. At the same time, we should recognize that Saudi Arabia and Israel have been in contact with each other, not so openly. So, you're right, other countries will follow, and if they follow, that's not a bad thing. Because as I said, countries should recognize each other and work with each other. Now, that it will hurt the Palestinians is obvious, because Netanyahu wanted to annex a good part of the West Bank, and he started the sort of campaign in March, and he wanted to complete it or announce it on the 1st of July, but he failed because Gantz, the alternate prime minister, stood in the way. He said that let us sort of deal with the coronavirus first, and then we will look at it. And even more importantly, the White House told him, then Netanyahu, he was prevented from going ahead with annexation. He worked on UAE, and as we all know, President Trump brokered this agreement where it is said that Israel will suspend, quote-unquote, its plans for annexation in that joint statement by the 3 countries.
Master Fabian, when we see the Palestinian leaders criticizing this deal, and we also had some of them saying that they have been stabbed in the back by the UAE, do you feel that this harsh criticism then carries some weight?
I'll put it this way. UAE has never been a passionate advocate of Palestinian rights for a long time. And not so, don't forget, UAE and Israel have been getting closer to each other for quite some time. In 2015, Israel established a representative mission in Abu Dhabi, because Abu Dhabi is the host of International Center for Alternative Energy. Already an Israeli representative office in Abu Dhabi. And then in July, UAE sent 2 plane loads of medical supplies and all that, ostensibly meant for the Palestinians, but the planes landed at the Ben Gurion airport. Well, the Palestinians rejected the gifts. And moreover, the UAE ambassador in Washington, Al-Otaiba, he wrote an article which was published in an influential Hebrew journal. And the article said that let not Israel be under any illusion that its annexation will not stand in the way of its further reaching out to the Arab states. So this has been planned for quite a while. And I don't think Palestinians are right in calling it a stab in the back, because they should have known that it was coming. And as I said, I repeat, UAE has not been in the front line advocating the Palestinian cause.
Ambassador Fabian, how do you see India in the equation? We have good ties with every nation state in the Middle East, and India today enjoys excellent relations with Israel, the UAE. How do you see India's position strengthening? Because for India, this should be a welcome move, and India has gone on record saying that they welcome this deal. So for India, is this a positive development that two nations with which individually it shares a great relationship are also today on the same page?
I will say yes. For India, it's a welcome development. In fact, as you know, the UAE Foreign Minister briefed our Foreign Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, and the MEA spokesperson came out with a very balanced, sober statement, which has 2 parts to it. It said that both these countries, India has excellent relations, and India is happy to see they are establishing normal relations. But then the second part is also important. The statement said that India hopes that Palestinians and Israelis will resume their negotiations towards realizing the two-state solution. So India's reaction has been very sober and balanced. And India certainly has every reason to welcome this move. But India also correctly pointed out the need for renewed Israel-Palestine negotiation for correctly stated purpose of a two-state solution, which means there should be an independent Palestine state.
Ambassador Fabian, we have seen over the last decade or even more, we have seen this written about and this talked about at length about the two-state proposal. But we have never really seen much groundwork happening on this. Do you feel with time, and a lot of people have pointed out that as more and more time goes by and Israel is accepted by more and more Arab states, maybe this two-state proposal is unlikely to actually be achieved at any time?
Well, I'll put it this way. As of now, the prospects are dim for a two-state solution for the good reason that Israeli leadership does not actually accept it. What Israel, at least the current leadership, wants is that, okay, Palestinians have a municipal status. If you recall, Trump planned things of a demilitarized state of Palestine with its external borders controlled by Israel. So it is a municipal status. So all that Israelis has been given is a bit of territory with municipal autonomy. And Israel has no intention of doing more. Now there comes the question whether Israel will be compelled by the international community, which means primarily the United States, into doing more. Trump, when it came to annexation, he did not give the green signal. There is some reluctance on the part of the international community and of the United States agreeing to such annexation. But I expect sometime or other slightly enlarged Palestinian entity to come up, but it will have only municipal autonomy. So you are quite right. The prospect of two states, in fact, let's cut out verbiage. The prospect of an independent Palestinian state emerging are quite dim at this moment. But I don't want to predict what might happen in the future.
Ambassador Fabian, we also saw that the White House released a joint statement on behalf of the three countries saying Israel and the UAE will meet in the coming weeks to sign bilateral agreements regarding investment, tourism, direct flights, security, telecommunications, technology, energy, healthcare, culture, the environment, the establishment of reciprocal embassies and other areas of mutual benefit. So if we look at this, also indicates that the relationship is going to be very expansive and we are going to see a very vibrant bilateral tie where both UAE and Israel are going to buy and sell from one another. How important do you think this is that two nations get into the prospect of trade, of buying from one another, and that economic activity actually spills over to other initiatives?
Absolutely right, saying that there will be a lot of economic activity. And then don't forget, the Israeli mission in Abu Dhabi will be able to interact with the rest of the GCC embassies. So Israel is actually entering not only the UAE, it is entering the GCC. That's point number one. And as I said earlier, even Saudi Arabia, though it finds it difficult to openly come out and establish diplomatic relations with Israel, and MBS, Trump has plans for using Israeli technology for the big plans that he has for a huge city near the Red Sea, which is also close to Israel, where he wants Israeli technological help and all that. So for Israel, it's a big gain. For UAE also, it is some gain, but I think Israel has gained much more. But, these things happen. You cannot always have a situation where the gains are equal. But this is certainly a major development. And Trump is probably waiting for announcing the date in case Oman or Bahrain also might join in.
Ambassador Fabian, where does this leave Iran in the equation? Because we've seen the U.S. has been so openly critical of Iran, and we know that Iran and Israel don't see eye to eye on any of the issues. Where does this leave Iran in the entire equation when it comes to the Middle East?
Well, this is certainly a setback for Iran, but I doubt whether it's a major setback. And as regards America, well, you certainly would recall that America scored a self-goal in the Security Council the other day in the context of Iran. America wanted the arms embargo on Iran to be not to be lifted by October as per the JCPOA, that is the nuclear deal with Iran. Now Trump has said that he would have what is called a snapback provision for reimposing UN sanctions on Iran. But I don't think it's a legally valid position because Trump has already walked out of the agreement. So if you look at Clause 36 in that huge, long JCPOA, it says that a participant, a signatory to the agreement can make a complaint. But America is no longer a signatory, therefore America cannot make a complaint. So there will be a lot of noise. But that Iran is concerned, at least in Security Council, it is not going anywhere.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the politics of the Middle East and especially on the agreement reached between Israel and the UAE. With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on relations between UAE and Israel. The participants were KP Fabian, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You may listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.